All right, thank you for coming out today. A little warm, but hopefully no rain, so we decided to hold it under the gazebo. So let's hope for that. The Delhi Historical Society would like to welcome American Revolution historian Scott Payne today's presentation. Scott brings many years of research, studying, and conducting dozens of presentations related to the American Revolution in New York State. Today's presentation is titled Snow Turned Red, the Cherry Valley Massacre. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott Payne.
Good afternoon. Now, when I sent, I believe, a list of presentations that I do, and I guess you guys voted on what you wanted to hear, and was that what happened?
I kind of just told him what
You told them what you wanted, so you picked it.
I still have, yes, I did.
You picked it. Because I always ask people, I get a list of presentations I do, and you pick a subject, and I'm thinking, why do you choose this? So what was fascinating to you about the Cherry Valley Massacre?
Well, I was thinking Cherry Valley being somewhat close to us.
Okay.
That seemed to be, I guess, the main reason. I mean, of course, there's so many battles, Saratoga.
Right.
They were all sound very interesting and worthwhile, but Cherry Valley seems like closer to home.
Okay. Now, anybody ever been to Cherry Valley?
Yeah.
Have you ever visited the sites there, the massacre sites, the museum? Okay, good. That's what I like, an audience that doesn't know more than I do. Because if I can get away with more that way.
Yeah.
Not really, but I do encourage you, and I do have afterwards, I don't have a lot of here, so I got brochures of the tour, so you will say, where did he say this house was? Where was this? The wind's against
What
me.
we said about the wind.
The elements. That's okay. They'll stay down now. But I will point out some things on here, and when I do, I will hold them. And afterwards, you can come up and look a little closer. But yeah, the maps tell where these different sites are. It's not a lot. Cherry Valley, is a small town, hardly anything there. There's not even a Stewart's there. There's a Rapido gas station. Look. So, what do you know about the Cherry Valley Massacre then, other than it took place in Cherry Valley, New York? And apparently it took place during the winter, right? Because it was snow turned red. It took place on November 11th, 1778. What other day is held on that day? A holiday, right? Armistice Day, Veterans Day. I will get this out of the way immediately so you're not saying, what is this guy wearing? Okay. Kind of what idea I'm trying to give here is what? What nationality, what group of people Okay, Native Americans, right. And they were very prominent at the Battle of Cherry Valley, or if you're on the Patriot side, it was the Cherry Valley Massacre. There were Seneca Indians there, and there were Mohawk Indians there who sided with the British. Now I don't know how much you know, so I'm going to tell you everything I know. So we'll be here a few minutes. Not all the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee sided with the British during the Revolutionary War. The Oneida Indian Nation, up in Oneida and Verona and that area, they sided with the Patriots. But the two other nations who were really instrumental in siding with the British were the Seneca and the Cayuga and the Mohawk. Cayuga a little bit, not as much as the Seneca and Mohawk, which is kind of ironic. If you remember your 7th grade history on New York State, remember learning the 6 nations, 5 nations, look at a map of New York, and it was, my teacher taught me this, and I remember it to this day, 50 years later or whatever. SCOOM was the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk, right across New York State. So at the Cherry Valley Massacre, this group of people, I will get to them, they're called Butler's Rangers. I'll go in more depth with those. They were loyalists. They were people who lived in America, lived here for quite a few years, and decided when the United States declared its independence. Here's another side note. July 4th, we celebrate Independence Day, correct? Just had that. You know what happened on July 4th, 1776? That's when we celebrated our independence. But what actually happened on that day? See, everybody says, oh, that was the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Nobody signed it on that day. That's when it got approved by the First Continental Congress to, okay, go ahead, this is approved, go ahead with it. The actual signings were done starting on August 2nd. And you got that real big one on there, right? You signed your John Hancock, and then there were other men who signed this from all the colonies at that point. 13 colonies, all the way down to Georgia, yes. Now you think of your states here. We're near a lot of different New England states. Who's on our border to the east? If you go past the Hudson River, Vermont's the one I'm thinking of. Yes, up in the northern part. Well, Vermont was not one of the original 13 colonies. People think, what? It has to have been. It was one of the New England colonies. No. It became a state in 1791. It was its own independent nation from 77 till 91. But because of all that was going on in 77, Battle of Saratoga, the Oriskany Battle, all these things were going on, they kind of got forgotten and kind of swept under the rug. But they declared their independence. They were their own sovereign nation for those years. So New York was a colony, of course. And we were a hotbed of activity for many reasons. The big reason is transportation. New York City. What river flows into New York City? Hudson River. So that goes all the way up north, all the way up past Albany, up to where Lake George, Lake Champlain. Just a little north of Albany, though, is a little town called Cohoes. And that's where the Mohawk River, which flows west to east, dumps in. There's a falls there, and it dumps into the Hudson River. Before they had highways, this thruway, the interstates, how did people travel? By waterways. And the only way you could get anywhere, unless you wanted to go through the woods, which was never easy, was to go waterways. So effectively, this is something they did all the time. The Indians, the natives, before contact in the 1600s, they would go from New York City up to Cohoes, across the Mohawk River, out to Rome, New York. Anybody ever been to Rome? Fort Stanwix? Wood Creek is there. Well, there's that little area about 2 miles wide between the Mohawk River and Wood Creek, where they had to portage, carry their canoes, carry their bateaux or their boats. And that was called the Oneida Carrying Place. And they carried the boat, then they get on Wood Creek. Wood Creek would take them up to Lake Oneida. From Oneida, it would go up the Oswego River to Oswego, which is on Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario, you can go to Erie, and then from there you can go any other Great Lake, and they would take you out west. So that waterway was key. That's why New York State was such a hotbed of activity. Down in Georgia, yes, it was a colony, and there were fighting going on down there. There was fighting going on in South Carolina and North Carolina, Guilford Courthouse, and these places in Virginia and things. But New York was a key to the war. So what's this all have to do with Cherry Valley? Well, nothing happens in the war or any war in a vacuum. It just happens, hey, let's fight here. Cherry Valley, that's a cute name, let's fight here. And that was the name of the town at that time, was Cherry Valley. A lot of these places you go to and you're like, what battle of what? That's not even a town anymore. Or the battle wasn't even fought there, like the Battle of Bennington. You heard of the Battle of Bennington? Part of the Saratoga campaign. Bennington is in what state? Vermont. But where was the battle fought? New York. Walloomsac, New York. But they were trying to get to Bennington to get the storehouse, to get ammunition, to get food. It was the Northern Army. But the Northern Army was New York State. They wanted to get that new Northern Army. Burgoyne sent Frederick Baum, a German, to get that storehouse. He never made it. Guy from New York or New Hampshire. You ever see a New Hampshire license plate? I should have brought one with me. What's it say on there? Live free or die. Live free or die. You know who said that? John Stark. John Stark came out and he knew he wasn't a member of the Continental Army. He was part of the militia, part of the New Hampshire militia. And he didn't obey what General Washington told him. I want you to come up and help in Burgoyne and Saratoga and Schuylerville and Albany and that area. He's like, I don't work for you. I work for the people of New Hampshire. Well, he came out, beat the men at the Bennington battlefield in Walloomsac, New York. Okay, all these things going on, back and forth. They took us, we're going to strike them. So I have this board down here. What ignited the Cherry Valley Massacre? It wasn't just, hey, let's go raid this town. We know most of the soldiers are gone. There's no storehouse here. It's in the winter, which makes it even tougher to go into battle. There's women and children and older people. Let's go slaughter them just for the fun of it. No. There were things that led up to this from the early part of 1778 on until November. And it was a retaliatory thing. So it started out with the British. And the British, you think, oh, the British. I have a British flag here, United Kingdom. But you know, a lot of the British were not British that fought for the British. They were what? German. Mm-hmm. And I always learned in school, and I looked at, you read history, and the Hessians. Hessians were the Germans, which is true, but that wasn't all the Germans that were there. And I thought every German that fought was a Hessian. There were other people that came from Germany, from the province of Braunschweiger, not the sausage, and we translate Brunswickers. So in Brunswick, they were brigadoon, or the ones who went on horses. They came over here. They had the high boots up past their knees. They had long coats down past their knees, and these high hats. These were the grenadiers, and these guys were German, and they didn't speak any English. And then you had the natives. And like I said, the Mohawk and the Seneca were the two big nations that fought for the loyalists, the British. Well, they decide they're gonna raid up into the Mohawk Valley. Mohawk Valley was a fertile area. Schoharie Valley, same thing. You've been to Schoharie Valley, Middleburg, Cobleskill, you had the old stone fort over there. There's a marker as you go into Schoharie, it says, breadbasket of the revolution. Because the rich, fertile farms there provided wheat and corn and all this sustenance for the Patriot forces. Same with the Mohawk Valley. So all these farms and everything were very instrumental and key, you know, the old saying, what, an army can't march on an empty stomach. So if you take their food away, it's going to cripple them. So he's hiding over here now that I got everything done. Now the wind stopped blowing for a few minutes. I'm going to put this back up. Does anyone recognize this gentleman here?
Joseph Brett.
Yes, Joseph Brandt.
Wow, you guys are good. This flag is the flag of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. It represents all the nations. Onondaga in the middle here with the pine tree. But yes, Joseph Brandt, his Indian name, Mohawk name was Tyandanega. So you've heard of him. What do you hear about him? What did he do?
He was one of the leaders of the Indian raid party.
Okay. He and another guy, and I'll just show you this real quick in passing. Sir William Johnson, you've heard of him. This is Sir William Johnson, died 1774, right before the war started. This is his wife. This is the only known painting of her. That was Molly Brandt, Joseph Brandt's sister. So that makes her, well, common law wife. Whether they got married, they had 8 children together. So in any event, they were a couple for quite a few years, and he died. Sir William died. Molly Brandt, or Mary Brandt. So when William Johnson died, basically Joseph Brandt took it upon himself to be, because Sir William Johnson was the superintendent of Indian Affairs for the whole state of New York. Joseph Brandt, Chief Joseph Brandt. Nope, he was never a chief. He was never a sachem. He wasn't a leader in any kind of meetings or anything with the Haudenosaunee. He was a war captain. So he took it upon himself, and he joined up with a group of men called Butler's Rangers. You ever heard of Butler's Rangers?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Fonda, New York,
Mm-hmm.
up on Route 5. Fonda, New York, there's a place called Butlersbury. It's still there. That's where John Johnson, his father, and Walter Butler and some cousins started Butler's Rangers. Could have been easily, better called Butler's Raiders, because this is what they did. And both sides did this. But Walter Butler and Joseph Brandt teamed up, and they raided these communities in the Mohawk and Schoharie valleys. There's 3 sites here that they've raided. Now, the one I already talked about a little bit is the Battle of Cobleskill in May of '78. Wasn't much of a battle, and you think the community of Cobleskill was a farm here, 2 miles away, another farm. So it was a very minor, but the idea was to instill fear, to take food, any kind of items you could use for yourself. Then there was a battle of, it was a raid of Richfield Springs. You know where that is. Just a little bit between Richfield Springs and you go down into Mohawk down. It's called Andrustown. And it was the same type of thing. It was a lightning strike raid. They went in, they raided, they killed, they took what they needed. And then there was the third one. And I'm sure all of you have heard of this guy. Adam Helmer. No, never heard of him. But I know you've heard of this. Drums Along the Mohawk?
Yeah.
Okay, Drums Along the Mohawk, written by Walter Edmonds back in the 30s. A book about this whole raid and about the Battle of Oriskany. Portrayed in the movie by Henry Fonda. Very poorly done because it's comical almost. It's a fictitious book. It's a historical fiction. But this raid on German Flats. German Flats consists of Herkimer, Mohawk, Ilion, up in that area. And they raided there. Well, Adam Helmer was taken captive in this place called Edmiston. Over on Route 8, going up towards Chobani has a huge plant there now. If you go down where Chobani is, you can actually drive underneath their walkway, and you can go over, get on the next highway and go to the left, back out, back to the Unadilla River. You come up to a place called the Carr Farm. Percival Carr owned this farm, and he was a loyalist. Now, what's a loyalist? Someone who is loyal to who?
British.
Okay, that's what we've always learned, right? Loyalist. But the historians and the scholars and people smarter than I am have decided that loyalist could be you're loyal to George Washington and the Continental Army, right? So it doesn't really tell loyalty. So we call them royalists. Now immediate royalty. Okay, we got a king here. George Washington later on did not want to be king. They tried putting him as king. They tried doing this in Newburgh, and the Newburgh conspiracy, and that's something we can look into later on toward the end of the war. He did not want to be a king. He wanted to be by the people and serve his people. So they're royalists. Well, Percival Carr was a royalist, and he let Joseph Brandt stage things there and be able to raid the Mohawk Valley without having to go all the way back down to, we'll talk about this in a minute, Anaquaga. So this is done. All these raids are done. Well, Percival Carr knew they were coming. So what he did was he took and he buried a bunch of dishes. His wife put them in wooden boxes and they buried these dishes. Early 1900s, they're out plowing, whoever owned this land now, and they come across something with a plow. Boom, they hit a couple wooden boxes. They pulled them out and the dishes are still all intact. And they're still in the New Berlin Library now. You can go downstairs and they're in a cabinet that's air controlled. These 250-year-old dishes or more. Unbelievable. So, well, the Patriots, we're not going to have any of this. You attack us, 3 places, we're going to attack you. So they decide they're going to retaliate now. And I mentioned Anaquaga. Anyone ever heard of Anaquaga? Windsor, right? Damascus, Windsor, it's down 79. There's a little town, it's called Anaquaga now, or Aquaga. And Joseph
lake?
What's that?
There's a lake.
No,
A lake.
that's in Deposit, that's different than this. No, this is along the, no, it's fine, along the Susquehanna River. And he had a huge, and I say he, Joseph Brant, we used to be in Oneida Village, that was Oneida land. But Joseph Brant, early on in the war, they kicked them out and the Mohawks took that over. And this is one of the places they attacked. Well, it's interesting because when the soldiers from the Patriots came, they kept notes, diaries about what the place looked like. And the one guy wrote, it's 40 houses on both sides of the river. Now, wait a minute, I thought these were Indians. Didn't they live in teepees? No. What do they live in this part of the country?
Actually, houses and windows.
That's right. At this point, 1779, 78, when this is happening, they are not living in the long houses anymore. After they met, European contact, they adopted and they have nothing bad about that. They've taken a lot of the European way. Houses, glass windows, doors with hinges and locks. They have pens for their animals now. They don't have to go on these 2-month raiding, hunting expeditions to get their food or fish. So these guys are like, these houses are beautiful. They're better than we have. But they torched them anyway. They torched all of them except one. And the reason they kept the one is because a man named Peter White, or Good Peter, lived there. And he was in Oneida. It was his house. But when he got kicked out, they said, we'll keep it. We'll keep it in honor of him. So they had the Battle of the Anaquaga burning. Then in Unadilla. Now you think of Unadilla, you think of the town of Unadilla, we pronounce it. But actually Unadilla, old Unadilla, was where Sydney is today. That same idea. They had their villages right along the river there. Susquehanna River. The General Clinton Canoe Regatta goes right down through there. And that's why the Susquehanna River is where they came. And I'll get to that at the end. And then there was a third place. Probably not heard of this one. This is called Cunahunta. It's between Afton and Nineveh on Route 7. If you go and you can look down, it's both sides of the road with another village. Well, they burned all that. Well, okay, that's it. That's it. Joseph Brant, Walter Butler. But I want to read to you a letter because it's a letter written by someone who was at Fort Schuyler. Fort Schuyler is Fort Stanwix today. Okay? And it was written to Ichabod Alden. You ever heard of him? Wow. This letter came November 6th. Okay, so this is 5 days before the massacre. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know the 11th. They better get out of town. He writes a letter. Colonel Alden says, Sir, we were just informed by an Oneida Indian, member of the Allies of the Patriots, that an Onondaga Indian arrived at their castle from one of the branches of the Susquehanna called Tioga. Tioga, you know where that is? That's a little bit south of New York in Pennsylvania. Tioga, Chemung, then you get to Elmira, and that's all part of that whole area there. So he was at Tioga at a meeting. There he was present at a great meeting of the Indians and Tories at that place, and the result was to attack Cherry Valley. And that young Butler, so I don't have a photo of him, I don't have any photos. You know why I don't have any photos? Nobody smiled during the pictures during the Revolutionary War. Did you know that? No cameras, right? So young Butler, Walter Butler, is going to be leading the attack. I send you this information that you may be on your guard. Remember, this is Ichabod Alden, the colonel of the fort, supposed to protect all the people in Cherry Valley. Alden's reply was courteous but short. In effect, he was obliged by the information. So, he didn't take heed to this because this was given to him by a guy named Nicholas Sharp. Who's that? Well, he had a nickname. His name was Saucy Nick. And the Indians called him Lagatutai, which means he who continues to speak. And in school, my teacher used to tell me, She didn't give me the name Luagatutai, but it could have been. Well, you got diarrhea of the mouth, she said. I like to talk. Can you guess? So this guy's got a nickname, Saucy Nick. He's a storyteller, and he likes to talk. So Alden probably figured, I'm not taking anything this guy takes serious. He's probably working for the other side anyways. But the inhabitants of Cherry Valley made true requests to Alden. First of all, they requested permission to remove to the fort, because they were in houses now. They wanted to go back to the fort, because they were in the fort for the spring, summer, and fall. Or at the least, let us put our possessions in the fort where they'll be safe. Well, Alden refused both requests. Now, it should be added here that Alden and the 6th Massachusetts Regiment that he commanded were not familiar with the frontier at all. They were from Massachusetts. They were city slickers, basically, because Massachusetts was pretty civilized. New York State was the frontier. The frontier means it's the Indians' land, and you don't want to mess around going on their land. You get caught, and things will happen. So they were not very good at the frontier warfare. Now, on the night of November 9th, 2 days before the battle, he did take some precautions. He said, okay, I'm going to send some scouts out. Now, if you know where Cherry Valley is on 166 there, if you continue down, you'll end up in Milford, about 17 miles. Well, he kind of figured they were coming from that direction. So he said, I'll send some scouting parties out on the 9th and see if they hear or see anything. Well, they went out, and they stayed 2 or 3 days, and it started snowing. So they stayed where they were, about 3 miles south of Cherry Valley, and they were getting covered with snow. Next morning came on the 10th. And the poor guy who was in charge, his name was Adam Hunter, he feels somebody poking him. Well, who was it? Well, we're going to go back a year now, 1777 in Albany. Actually, it took place up in Germantown. A bunch of people got arrested for being Tories and taken to Albany. And Walter Butler was one of these men. Now, they could have put him, hung him for being a traitor and all this, but they kept him in jail. But he had a lot of friends in Albany, and they came to visit him. And some pretty girls came to visit him. So he hatched a plan. Aha! See that guard out there? Use your charm and get him drunk. And he got drunk and dozed off, and Walter Butler was able to escape Albany. So he goes back to the Mohawk Valley doing his raiding and everything. Now fast forward back to Cherry Valley. He's poking. Here's a guy poking him. Adam Hunter's laying there and wakes up and he kind of rubs his sleep. And who's he looking at? Walter Butler. The guy, he's thinking, last time I saw you, you were in prison in Albany. Now all of a sudden you're... So they asked him, how many are there? Where are they? How many's in the fort? And he squealed like a pig. He told them everything. I mean, you were surrounded by Tories, Walter Butler's Rangers, Seneca Indians. He told them what he wanted, everything. So that was the 10th. So the night of the 11th, Sunday, the night before, they planned this attack. And as would be, the snow turned red, of course. So it snowed like crazy, but it was a wet snow. So November 11th dawns, and it's a slushy, yucky mess getting through. So Walter Butler, coming from the south end of Cherry Valley, and the first place they would come to would be right here. No, I got this backwards now because my board moved. No, this is it. Why is it? Yes, this is it. I'm sorry. Willow Hill. It was on the southern end of town, and this is where Colonel Alden was staying with his second in command and his family and their family. There was like 15, 20 people here. And when they started going to Cherry Valley, Butler and Brant weren't on the same page. They butted heads. They might have worked together for a common good, but they didn't like each other because Butler thought, I'm not going to be commanded by some Indian. And Joseph Brant thought the same thing. I know this land. This is my land. Johnson was my father and brother-in-law, so I'm going to be the one who decides what we do. So Butler represented him for that. So they decided, Brant decided, he came from the Mohawk Valley, I'm going to go back up to Fort Oswego up in Syracuse, up north of Syracuse. Well, he gets going and he meets up with Butler, and Butler says, you're coming with me, Mohawk chief or Mohawk captain. I don't think so. I'm going, no, you come with me or you're not getting paid. John Butler, his father, won't pay you if you don't come with me. So he reluctantly went. So he went, and they got closer to the place. Well, Joseph Brant decided, I'm going to take a different way to get there. So they split up, and he went up. At the end of Cooperstown, the end of Seagull Lake's a place called Hyde Hall. Okay, you've been there, so you know that road that goes out. That's where Joseph Brandt took. He took that road that goes up past Hyde Hall, takes you up to Route 20. And then he cut across and went this way because he wanted to get to town first. Why do you think he wanted to get to town first? He wanted to get to Cherry Valley before Butler. Why do you think so? He wanted to get there and slaughter everybody first so Butler would get any credit? Nope. He wanted to get there to warn people because he had a lot of friends that were patriots that he wanted to warn them because they were his friends, and there were a lot of children, a lot of women, so he wanted to get there first. Well, he got kind of slowed up in a muddy swamp because of the rain and everything that had come. It wasn't as frozen. So Butler came the other way. Butler came down 166 there where it comes into the Wells home here, Willow Hill at the time. Now Butler was a savage enough, him and his Butler's range. They were savage. They were pretty rough. But the Seneca Indians who they had with them were even worse. They were the most ferocious of the 5-6 nations. And the reason I dressed like this is Butler's Rangers, a lot of times they had the normal patriot clothing, a hunting shirt, a lot of things they've traded with the natives, with the Iroquois. So they said, hey, we shave our heads, we put makeup on. Now, sometimes I do this presentation, I have a whole red head with some black around my eye. I mean, my wife said, ew, don't do that, you scare people. Well, that was the incentive. That was what they were going to do. They wanted to scare them. Even though this is a white person, you're dressed up, you look ferocious. You go with your whoop, you're screaming, you look ferocious, and they descended on the Wells house. Now, the funny thing is, I don't know if Walter Butler knew this was their house or didn't care or couldn't control the Senecas. The Butler family were friends with the Wells. Now, there was a man staying there named Reverend Dunlop, and he was the father-in-law of the young Wells there who owned the house. Well, the Seneca came in, and they didn't care. Even if Butler had told them, these are friends of mine, don't harm them. He went in, and they went upstairs. They caught Dunlop was in prayer. They killed him right there. Killed pretty much everybody. Alden was downstairs, so as this all came in the back door, he went out the front. He started running, going towards Cherry Valley, toward where the fort is. Now, you know when you go to Cherry Valley, you said you've been there, the cemetery as you go into town is on the right side, and 166 here, and then there's a car shop there. That was all Fort Alden. I went across that road, wasn't there at the time, but it stretched out from the creek behind the cemetery all the way to Cherry Valley Creek, this big fort. So he's trying to get to the fort, get in there safe. Now remember, all the civilians have been sent home. There's nobody hardly in the fort except a few soldiers. So Alden's running up and over the hill. If you go to the Wells house, you can drive up the road a little bit. It's Fish and Game Road. You go up to the top of the hill, and then it starts slanting down toward the village. Well, one of the Indians in the house that came in took off after poor Colonel Alden, and he hollered for him to stop. Well, Alden took his musket, and because it was wet and raining, he fired a shot, and it popped. Nothing came out of the gun. He tried again, and nothing happened. But the Indian who was chasing him felt threatened, so he took his tomahawk and he threw it. Now, he's got to have pretty good aim. He threw it at him from a good distance, and he hit him in the head, knocking him down, possibly killing him, but he didn't think so. He went, got it, got to him, got the tomahawk up, and he finished him off and scalped him right there. Now, for years, they wondered who this Indian was. Does it really matter? No, but it's pretty interesting who they ended up finding out who it was, because their letters saying, I saw him do it. You know who it was? Bet you can guess. It was Joseph Brandt. Joseph Brandt and Colonel Alden were friends. This happened all the time during the war. Whether he didn't know it was Alden or whether he didn't care, you're on the opposite side. You're my enemy. And that happened to Joseph Brandt and General Nicholas Herkimer at the Battle of Oriskany. They met many times in Sydney, Unadilla there. They talked to each other. They were friends because they came up and lived in the Mohawk area. The Palatine Germans came there. So Herkimer was a friend of Brandt, but they met and they couldn't decide, you're going to be on my side. You should join our side. Nope, you should be on the Patriot side. I won't do it. A few months later, that was in June of 77. In August of 77, the Battle of Oriskany, and they were on opposite sides, literally fighting against each other. So here Joseph Brandt kills Alden, and Alden lays there for the whole day while his men are, you can see, I mean, it's a small area, everything was going on. They could see their commander dead, scalped there. So then they went to another house. You've heard of him before, Reverend Dunlop's house. Now this is pretty graphic here. But before that, let's see, the Alden marker here. Right on 166, there's a marker right by the road that says, on this spot, Colonel Alden was felled by the tomahawk on the day of the massacre, November 11, 1778. Now that was done by the DAR back in the early 1900s. But there's this marker here that was put up by different businesses in Cherry Valley sponsored these markers. You've seen the blue and yellow markers, right? There's one over in the square here. They didn't put any of those in town like that, the yellow and blue and state markers. They did them on their own. But this is Alden marker, November 11, 1778. This monument marks the spot where Colonel Ichabod Alden, commander of the fort, was tomahawked by Joseph Grant. After Alden's pistol misfired, Colonel Alden was warned of a possible attack on the settlement, but made minimal preparations. So after they found research letters that came out that confirmed that it was Joseph Grant was the one who actually killed him. So they go to the Dunlop house afterwards. They knew the Reverend Dunlop was there, so they knew there were people at home at the Dunlop house. Okay, Dunlop house. And if you know where the school is, you go to church, you know where the gas station is, the only one in town. You go to where Marabo's is down the corner, you go right, turn right there, and go down about a mile. This is where the Dunlop marker is, and this old monument, I mean, this is over 100 years old. This is like 1880s this is built. And I was here a couple of weeks ago, and they're trying to raise funds to restore it, because it's made of concrete and Portland cement, but it's falling apart, it's in disrepair. They want to get some funds raised for it. But what happened here, same type of thing. The woman, Dunlap, Mrs. Dunlap, came to the door with a baby in her hand. Now, like I said, the Seneca were savage. Man, woman, child, they didn't have the same view of life that Patriot, the white people, had. So they shot her with the baby right in her hand. They scalped the baby. There's a lot of horrific killing here. And they cut her arm off, and the marker says it on here. And they took her arm and they chucked it up into an apple tree. Now, there is an apple tree there now. I don't think it's the same one, but it's probably a descendant of that tree. You know, it was horrific. Dunlop was kept alive, but barely. And he probably wished he'd have gotten killed there, because what they did with the prisoners, they marched them to Fort Oswego. Imagine going from New Cherry Valley up marching in the winter, and if you were slow, you were elderly, you were injured, you were hurt, whatever reason, you slowed up everybody. They knocked you off the side, they killed you and scalped you, and they left your body there on the side of the road to rot. So wouldn't it be better to know, hey, I know Reverend Alden was killed with his wife here, I know where he is, I know where he's buried. Now you have no idea where they even made it up there. If they're killed laying on the side of the road dead, scalped, so there was no closure for families to even know who was lived and who didn't. So then the fort. Where's the fort? The fort's over here. It's a cemetery now. It was partial cemetery then too, but here. There's a marker in there. And there's another marker. There's a huge monument there. It looks like almost like a big coffin casket. I don't know if they intended it to be that way, but it's elevated up on the stones, and it has sacred to the memory of those who died in the massacre, in the destruction of the village at the hands of Indian Tories under Brant and Butler, November 11, 1778. I love it. They always do this, under Brant and Butler. No, it was under Butler and Brant. Brant was not the leader of this. Butler was the leader of this. Brant went reluctantly, and Brant went into houses and put marks on them, and there's actual accounts, letters, written that he came in and he marked, Seneca, right, coming, quick. Mark yourself. Mark your children. And when they come in, there was this unwritten code. Now, anybody could break it, but there was this unwritten code. You would not kill someone who was marked. This happened all over New York State. Down past Port Jervis, there's a marker down there talking about painted aprons, where Brant went in and told them, paint the aprons of these girls, because the Senecas are coming, and they're going to, whoever's here, they don't care if you're a man, woman, child, old, young, whatever, paint your aprons, and they spared them. So he did save a lot of lives that day, because the Seneca, like I say, were in Brant and Butler's Rangers were ferocious guys. But there's other markers here on the other side. This talks about those who were buried there from the Battle of Frontenac during the French and Indian War, and other things that people of Cherry Valley had done in wars prior to this.
Wasn't Grant educated in Connecticut? I mean,
Yeah.
was he
Yes.
fluent in English?
Oh, yes.
He was Masonic brother
Yes,
too.
yeah. He went to Ebenezer Wheelock School in Connecticut, yes. He spoke better English than most English people because he spoke proper English, you know. Yes. So the massacre's over and every house was burned. The fort was the only thing that wasn't. There was another smaller massacre a year later where they did burn the fort and get rid of the fort. And July 4th, July 3rd of 1778, so it was a few months before this, something other massacre took place near Wilkes-Barre, modern day Wilkes-Barre. You know it, you've been ready to tell me, right? Wyoming Valley Massacre? Nope, nobody's ever heard of the Wyoming Valley Massacre. You know where Wyoming is, the state. That's not it. Wyoming County, New York, that's not it either. That's out in western New York. I used to live out that way. But this is Wyoming Valley because the Wyoming River down by Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. And this was done. And who do you think led this?
Grant.
Right, Walter Butler. This is key though because Grant was blamed for it. After this massacre in July of '78, the newspapers came out and said, "Oh, the horrific atrocities committed by the monster Brant on the civilians of Fort 40 Fort it was called because that was 40 families that settled that area, so they named it 40 Fort." One guy said, "Oh, I don't know, I guess it was the 40th Fort." I'm like, "No, it's not the 40th Fort. It was the 40 families that were there." So he was blamed for it. He was in the Mohawk Valley at that time. He wasn't even there as a participant, as an aide or anything. But he got blamed and he got called the Monster Brant. And every time a newspaper article came out now after something like this would come out, the Monster Brant burns Fort Decker in Port Jervis. Anybody ever been down that way? You go down Route 97, go to Hancock, go down Route 97 down to the Hawk's Nest down there.
Oh yeah.
The Hawk's Nest, that famous road that's all like this. They do a lot of commercials there. If you get to Port Jervis, Fort Decker was another smaller fort. Peen Pack, Battle of Mini Sink is down there. Anybody ever been to that battlefield? The Roebling Bridge is right
Yes,
across the
yes,
street,
I
and then the
definitely-
Zane Gray Museum
You
is
gotta
that
go up
area.
up a little
Yes,
hill.
up a little hill. It's a small battlefield. You can walk the whole thing in half an hour.
Right.
There's 3 key sites. That was in 79 because it was this is very key. It was a couple weeks before the Sullivan-Clinton expedition. He was down in Port Jervis. He heard about them getting gathered up. Now the Sullivan-Clinton expedition is going to wrap up in August of 79. But Brant he was educated. He knew English. He went to England before in 76, actually went on a ship over to England and asked King George, had a meeting actually with King George III about, hey, supporting us. Sir William Johnson was a great advocate for you in bringing peace with the Six Nations. Now you go a little farther west and you talk with the Hurons, some of the other Indians out in the Great Lakes region, they couldn't stand Sir William Johnson because he encouraged the Seneca and the Cayuga and the Onondaga, the Western Haudenosaunee Nation, keep moving, take more land. Fight them, beat them, take their land. And so they didn't. The Haudenosaunee loved him, but none of the other nations did. Even going down into Pennsylvania with the Mohican and the Delaware, the Lenape. So they didn't like Sir William Johnson, so in turn they didn't like Joseph Brant. So he decided to come back, and he came back from England, and he came back at the same time that the English sent about 100 ships to New York City. He disembarked there, and that's when he started going. Now, we talked earlier, 1776, right? This is the bicentennial, about a month ago, the 4th of July, see America 250 all over the place. And I predicted this, and it'll happen. It's already happened because they're discounting everything now. America 250, that's over. Because the 4th of July, as I said, isn't really the day we got our independence. It wasn't until what year? The war went on until 1783, right? That's what? 7 more years. Hard fighting. Yeah, you might declare your independence, but have you earned it? Have you fought for it? Has England and the British decided, said, "Oh, okay, we'll let you." And I love what I call him Prince Charles because I grew up with Prince Charles. Remember Prince Charles and Diana got married in 1981 or whatever. King Charles came over here a few months ago, remember? And he was talking, and he said, "Oh, so you're celebrating your 250th, or as we call it, yesterday, because our nation is so young." British history from 2,000 years ago, from the Romans up through, all the different things, the Tudor dynasty and all this going up through, America 250, that's just yesterday to us. Which is, they were a huge dynasty, a huge monarchy, and the biggest country, the most wealthiest country, the strongest country in the world at that point, 250 years ago. A bunch of these guys, we sent these over here to beat the Indians and to plant food and to send us money back. They can't beat us. Well, it happened, right? In our state. The year before this all took place in Cherry Valley, right? You talk about Saratoga, you think of New York State, Saratoga battles, there were 2 battles, right? That was the surrender of the British Army for the first time in history. And who sided with us after that?
French.
They call them America's first allies, the French, but they weren't America's first allies. Who was? What nation was the first allies of the Americans? The Oneida Indian Nation. Because they sided with us when the others didn't, and they sided with us at the Battle of Oriskany. So you've been to Fort Stanwix up in Rome. Just 5 miles away east of there is on Route 69 is the Oriskany battlefield. Fort Stanwix is important because they sieged that as part of the Saratoga campaign. I know I'm getting off the Cherry Valley, but this all ties in together here. Not a whole lot to say. I give you the high points here. Like I say, you need a map. You can go to these places and see these sites. Not a whole lot happened. It was a massacre. They killed everybody. They burned everything down. Basically, I can give you details, but that's basically what happened there. Well, this ticked George Washington off. Well, anyway, Saratoga, Oneida Indians at Oriskany, our first allies there. They helped us win, and they did a great job. If you go up to Utica, where the hospital is there's a huge mural alongside where the parking garage is of the Oneida Indian history. And one of the pictures is Hanyeri Dockstader, the leader of the Oneidas through the town of Oriska, and his wife, 2 kettles together, fought together. Well, he got shot in his wrist. Couldn't shoot with he could pull a trigger, but he couldn't hold the gun. He could hold it up like this, but he couldn't load it. So his wife was behind him, and she'd load it, hand him up the gun, boom, hand it back, she'd hand up a loaded rifle, boom. She rode on a horse with 2 pistols, loading her musket at the same time, shooting. So these guys, this couple were key in the winning of the Battle of Oriskany. And then the Oneida Indians went down in Valley Forge, right? You heard of Valley Forge? That encampment. It wasn't a battle there, but there was an encampment there during the winter. And after winter it was in April, the Oneida said, we got to take care of them. We got to send them some food. So they didn't just send them food, they took food down. 50 men and 1 woman went down with 600 bushels of corn. Now, I'm not talking about sweet corn, white corn. So they couldn't just eat it like we could. They had to boil it, they had to add certain things to it so it would be consumed, be fit for human consumption. Well, when they first got there, they started eating it. And then you ever eat raw rice? Same type of thing. What happens to it when it gets in your stomach? Then it swells, it bloats, it causes all kinds of problems with your digestive system. So Polly Cooper, anybody ever heard of Polly Cooper? Okay, she was a Native Oneida, went down and stayed with Washington's troops after the men went down to fight near Philadelphia, the Battle of Barren Hill. She told them how to cook it. You have berries in it. I mean, this stuff tastes terrible, but it was nutrients. Put berries in it, fruit in it, nuts in it, different things that, like kids would do. You try and spice it up to make them eat it, and that's what they did. But it gave them this food and this calories that they needed. So that was why the Oneidas were our first allies. But then the French did come, and they sent Lafayette. But back to this now. The Cherry Valley Massacre took place in November. July of the same year, the Wyoming Valley Massacre. Well, General Washington, remember him? He was the general of the Continental Army. He said, that's it. And he went, and he had a plan. Remember what I talked about at the beginning here. The Schoharie Valley and the Mohawk Valley were what? Red baskets, right there with food, right? Well, what about the Loyalists who have farms in the area? What about the Loyalists in the Finger Lakes region? Anybody ever been to the Finger Lakes, Seneca Lake? What do they have there? What's huge there?
Grapes.
Biggest industry, right? Wineries, vineyards, all over the place. And that's how it was then, and it is now. At that time, they didn't have wine and stuff, but they had peach orchards, apple orchards. They did have the vines. They had watermelons, other melon, cantaloupe. You don't think of that in New York State, but and there were fields that were just acres of this fruit. Well, this food was going to the British Army. Right there. They said they provided tons of food. So Washington came up with a plan. Now, what's the name of that expedition? Sullivan Clinton expedition. Right. Sullivan was the head of it.
Right.
But first, George Washington went to Horatio Gates. Remember, Horatio Gates was the commander at the battles of Saratoga, and he said, I got a job for you, Horatio. Oh, man, I can't. Oh, I got too many health problems. Can't do it. All right, I'll go to my second choice. Nathaniel Greene. Heard of him? All right, down in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and actually, the town of Greene is named after him. Nope, don't want to do it. Got too much stuff. Down the list. Fifth choice. Hey, John Sullivan, you're my first choice. I've got a great assignment for you, and you're my first choice, remember. So John Sullivan, okay, I'll do it. Now, John Sullivan you don't hear of except for this expedition, right? probably most of you haven't heard of him at all, except with this. He was at every major engagement up till 1779. He was at the battles of, what's those two big battles at the beginning of the war?
Bunker Hill.
Well, before Bunker Hill.
Oh.
Shot heard around the world.
Lexington and Concord.
Lexington and Concord. And if you go to Concord, Massachusetts and say Concord, they'll run you out of town.
Yeah.
They say
I was
Lexington.
just in Massachusetts.
You're cute.
They yelled
It's
at me
good.
for
Well,
my-
they have the accent.
They yelled at
Lexington.
me for my New York accent.
Concord. But even historians, it's Concord. No, Concord, great, that might come from it. Concord. He was at Barron Hill, or not Barron Hill, Bunker Hill, and Breed's Hill, which is another problem. People think Bunker Hill, that was a big site, but really the battle was fought at Breed's Hill there, next to Massachusetts, right near Boston. Boston. Then the siege at Boston, because within the Henry Knox Trail, remember that? Who remembers that? You've heard of it?
Yeah,
You heard of the Henry Knox Trail, Noble Train of Artillery?
yeah.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, he had to bring all of the armor, the cannons and everything down to help save Washington.
Yeah, where'd he get them from?
We've been Vermont.
It was Saratoga, I believe. Or no, Fort Ticonderoga.
Ticonderoga, right. In the winter,
Yeah.
they just celebrated 250 this last December. In the winter, they took these cannon tubes. They didn't take the caissons and the wheel, they took the tubes, put them on sledges and pulled them with, now this is a misnomer too, they said they used oxen. They used 90% horses and a few oxen, but every monument you see has oxen pulling these sledges. They had a lot of horses. All the way down to where? Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is just on the outside of Boston, because this was for the siege of Boston. Unbelievable, right? In the wintertime, these men, and they lost a couple in Albany, and the people of Albany came out and actually helped them retrieve it out of the bottom of the Hudson River and gave it to them. So they called it, when they got to Boston, the Albany cannon. Well, he's had it. So he's got John Sullivan now, and this is the plan, John. I got a guy coming too. His name is James Clinton. Heard of the General Clinton Canoe Regatta, right? James Clinton, this is named after him. Now, if I was in Mohawk or Seneca Indian, I'd protest that. Because you're celebrating that as a killing of a whole, trying to wipe out a whole civilization, a genocidal type thing, if you want to look at it that way. Now, that's one side. But he said, I got to get these people, I got to have you guys go through that and destroy all their crops, all their farms, because they're providing into our enemy. Now, Clinton started up in Canajoharie, came to Cooperstown, at Seagull Lake, he dammed it up there. He was there for a month. He dammed it. You ever been there to that
Yeah.
Yes.
park there?
Yeah.
What's the name of that park?
No,
It's
not.
not Glimmerglass.
Council Rock Park is right down there.
Yeah,
There's a rock
there's
out
a
there
rock.
that's too small now because it used to be bigger. They'd meet there. The Indians would meet there to make peace treaties. They'd meet with the white man. Well, they dammed that whole thing up. Go a little farther west, Richfield Springs, Canada-Rago Lake there. They said that that lake was so full because it's constantly being fed. It's not a pond, it doesn't sit. It's constantly being fed with streams. The water's constantly coming into it. And what happens when you dam something up? That water's got to go somewhere. They said that the Canada-Rago Lake and Otsego Lake were one solid lake. That's like 5-6 miles between the two. They're like twin lakes. Well, then the time came. He got word from Sullivan. Sullivan came up from Athens, Pennsylvania. He had Fort Sullivan there. Now's the time. We're going to meet up now. It's getting the beginning of August here. We got to get going. So we got an agenda. We got to make it to Fort Niagara. Now that's way out in Buffalo, Niagara Falls. That's a little bit farther than Oswego. So he gave word. They burst the dam. Boom! They brought the bateaus. While they were waiting, they built 200 flat-bottom boats, bateaus, to come down the river with. And they met up at Tioga. Remember we talked about Tioga earlier with Cherry Valley. But they met up at Tioga again here. And that's where they met up in Chemung. Burned that town. And they started out going, their whole objective was to go up to Finger Lake. Well, they met resistance in Elmira, Newtown. Newtown battlefield's right there. When you go on 17 out to Elmira, you're driving right on where the battle was, right along the Chemung River. The park's up on a hill, but that was just the remnants of when they decided that the battle was lost and they kept retreating and they went up. So they made it up there, and then they went, I'm not going to give the whole Sullivan Clinton expedition, right? But you know about it. They went up through Seneca, Cayuga Lake, burning villages, Pete Georgia, burning houses. They get to somebody's village, and there was actually a pot of food cooking that had just been, they just left 5 minutes before they got there. Because they run into the next village saying, they're coming. They're coming. They get up to Canada-Rago. You know where Canada-Rago is, right? What's that called today? That's at the top of Seneca Lake. That's called Geneva. One of these towns that's named after a city in Europe, right? Geneva, you have Rome, you have Utica, Syracuse. They did that back in the early 1900s. Different cities in Europe, these big names, they sounded neat. Instead of keeping the names they were given originally. But there's Geneva, and then they went across, and they did horrific things. And they came back down, and that was over with. But it didn't get rid of it. It stopped them for a time. But 80, 81, 82 comes, and New York State again is a huge area for these raids. The Schoharie Valley again, the Mohawk Valley. You got the Battle of Fort Clark and Stone Arabia up in the Mohawk Valley. You got the Battle of Flocky. But you've all heard of that, right? Battle of Flocky?
No.
Nobody ever heard of the Battle of Flocky. That was the first cavalry battle in United States history. Took place over in the Schoharie Valley in Middleburg. Just a small area, but there was a cavalry battle and, men on horses fighting each other with swords and sabers. So that is amazing that it took place right here in our little area. Most people don't know about it. I remember that Flocky. And that was named after the little town because the town was settled by a lot of Germans. They weren't called towns, they were called Dorfs. D-O-R-F. So you have Weisersdorf, Flockysdorf, these little areas down in the Schoharie Valley. So
It's village.
yes. Yeah. What did I say? City? No. Towns? Little villages, yes.
It
Dorf.
means village.
So, Cherry Valley's over. Sullivan Clinton's over. The war goes on until 1783, and eventually they said, okay, you can be your own independent nation. We'll leave you alone until, like you said. Another war come about 40 years later, 40 years later, the War of 1812. And then finally the Britons and the U.S. decided we're going to get together, and World War I, maybe this is quite a few years later, World War I, they were allies. We went over to help them. World War II, we went over to help the English and the French. So, any questions? Comments? I know I packed a lot in here. I know your mind's going, but it's concise. It's real, it's not every detail, but it's to
What do you know
stir
about
up interest.
The Sapbush Massacre? Up
Sugar Bush Raid.
Yeah, Harpersfield.
Anybody ever heard of that besides you,
Yeah,
Matt?
I don't know.
Anybody ever heard of the Sugar Bush Raid? Yep, because we're in Delaware. It's not that far.
No.
Who was in head of that raid? You know who it is.
Was
Say
it,
it.
was it Brand?
It was Joseph Brand. Joseph Brand, they were in the Schoharie Valley, and this was in April. Now, winters were tough back then. April, every so often, a few years ago, we had a lot of snow in April, and the power went out with a wet, slushy. April's still winter in 1781, that was. They got to go get sugar. They need food, so they said, we're going to go to Stanford, Harpersfield. We know about these sugar bushes. Well, it's what you do. You boil the sap down, and you make maple syrup. I don't think they had little cutters where they made maple leaf candies. I highly doubt that was there. My wife loves those. We go anywhere and it's, oh my goodness, maple leaf candy. Oh, my daughter and her get a pack each, and I don't get any. I liked it, but they wanted that calories, so they went, and there was a series of them. Now, they put these markers about 4 years ago, and I'm friends with the historian in Stanford. 2 of them were put in the wrong place. Yeah, they're not anywhere near where the site. He took me up to the actual site, but he said the guy who lives here doesn't want people coming, drawing it. And he had permission. He took me right out. You could tell where they had somebody, got killed right here by this tree. All this happened where they came and killed him. But they put the marker in another area, said half a mile. Well, I don't think they put that on there because they wanted to revise it. To say, hey, half a mile from this marker is where it actually took place. But there's a cairn there. You know what a cairn is? An Irish grave, stone cairns where they buried someone. That's at one of the sites. So, Melly Brant took one of the boys with her and took him back to Canada with her. And he escaped and walked all the way back down. Which brings up another good point. You ever go to Ontario, Canada, the province of Ontario, there's a huge area called Brantford. Because after all this happened in 1781-82, Joseph Brant had it with New York. He wasn't getting cooperation. His son was drunk and all this stuff. He went out to live in Ohio, which is actually where he was born, Joseph Brant. Then after the war, just as they did 100 years later, remember during the Lakota Sioux uprising, the Northern Plains Indians, they went to Canada. And that's where Joseph Brant, Molly Brant, his family went. And years later, they named this area Brantford, Ontario. He's a hero in Brantford, Ontario. There's hospitals named after him, libraries. And I talk about this at presentations. Okay, you talk about historic figures. Okay, let's start with, let's say Joseph Brant. Was he a hero or a zero?
Guess it depends on which
Which
side
side
you're
you're
looking
on, exactly. George Washington, was he a hero or a zero? Oh, he was a hero. Yeah, but you asked the Haudenosaunee Seneca Cayugas. No. And you know what his nickname was after this? Town Destroyer. In the native language, I can't pronounce it, but it's Town Destroyer. Now, the funny thing about that is he was a Town Destroyer because he was. That is the title given to every sitting U.S. president until this day. When they talk about the U.S. president, it's called whatever it is in their language, but it means Town Destroyer. What about Benedict Arnold? I love to talk about him. He had nothing to do with this, but was he a hero or a zero? Half and half, right?
Yeah.
So history, and this is very important when you study history and look at these battles, look at both sides, see why they did things. And I'm doing a presentation in September at the library in Sydney on divided loyalties, consequences of choosing a side. You know, you could have, the Civil War is known as the war between the states, or what against what? Brother. Right. The Revolutionary War was really the beginning of that, because you literally had brothers and brothers. Nicholas Herkimer, at the Battle of Oriskany, got accused of taking his time to relieve the siege at Fort Stanwix. Oh, how come? Because your brother is fighting for Barry St. Leger, who was one of Burgoyne's leaders. So you know what he did? Okay, you want to be a wise guy? He had Cox, Clock. These names are still very important up in the Mohawk Valley. Fort Clock, Cox. You had the Zimmermans, Timmermans, Snells. These all were his subordinate officers. They pushed him on. So he said, okay, let's go. They got to the battlefield in Oriskany, down into the ravine. Grant was waiting for him getting halfway through before he attacked, because they wanted him to be all jumbled up. First guys killed were Cox, Clock. All his subordinate guys were killed. This is what you get for being hasty. He got shot on his horse. Horse fell on him, on his leg. This is Herkimer. Picked him up. They put him over against the beech tree, and he commanded the battle for the rest of the day for 6 hours, on laying against the beech tree on his saddle. But his brother was on the other side. His brother lived. You have up in the Mohawk Valley, Sir William Johnson's son. When William Johnson died, John Johnson took over Johnson Hall. Anybody ever been there up in Johnstown? Okay, John Johnson came. They had a celebration, a commemoration 2 months ago, where it was the kicking of him out. They came in, they took his family, they took him, and they basically arrested him and said, get out of here, and they confiscated his house. Johnson Hall is a huge house. Beautiful house, one of the biggest houses in America at that time. And the tons of acreages that's with that, all that land came with that, so they just kicked him out. If you're a loyalist, you took a chance. Freeman's Farm, first battle at Saratoga. John Freeman, it's named after. John Freeman had a great farm there. Wheat fields, farm, barns, animals. He was a loyalist. He was heading up north to meet with Burgoyne to come down and fight the Patriots. He ended up ending up on his own land. Well, it wasn't his own land anymore. Once he left, that was it. He knew he would never come back and own it. And his son actually went with him to fight, and his son got killed on his own property right there on the Freeman's farm. So when you were a loyalist, you chose to side with King George instead of George Washington. There was some, and it worked both ways with that. If you sided with the Patriots, the loyalists would do. That's why Walter Butler was so ferocious. Him and his Rangers. You sided with George Washington and the Continental Army or local militia. You're going to pay. So yeah. So the Sugar Bush raid, right? Pretty neat stuff. That's the Delaware County, and most people haven't heard of it. Big thing in the Revolutionary War. That was it. So.
One question. Communication would have been minimal. So after the Cherry Valley Massacre, how long did it take for people to realize that they were in danger?
Well, because
all the way down to Susquehanna.
They weren't too much in danger at that point. Mostly it was up toward farther north, and they did worry, because that's why Fort Alden was even there in Cherry Valley, because that was a buffer for Fort Plain. You know, Fort Plain is up there on the Mohawk Valley. It's the biggest fort up there. Not the only fort up there, but that was a buffer. So when people heard about this raid, and they get it from word of mouth or things, they raced up to Fort Plain. It was up on a huge hill. But yeah, it wasn't done. There was no Facebook messaging anybody, no telephone, as the Hawaiians say, no coconut wireless. It was none of this. It was all done on a note given to someone, whether they ran with it, like Adam Helmer. I told you he warned people he ran for 30 miles, or on horseback. So you wonder how, like I said, when I mentioned the Declaration of Independence, these copies were made up on July 4th. Continental Congress approved it. They were made up and they were distributed to all the colonies. How long did that take? Well, that's why it probably took till August 2nd, almost a month later, before they actually signed it. Wasn't everybody in one room at one time signing it, because they were from all over, and it wasn't like hop on the subway or the bus or New York State Thruway to get to these places. It was all done by hiking. I mean, Joseph Brand, I talk about, because you go in New York State, he was everywhere. Port Jervis down there, he came up this area, down on the other side, on the 88 corridor, up in the Mohawk Valley, Schoharie Valley, Fort Oswego, Fort Niagara, New York State. He probably didn't ride a horse a lot. It was all on hoofing it on his own feet. So it's amazing how people got around back then, and how quickly information did get to the people, though. Didn't take a long time, because they had a system that worked. Like during Saratoga, General Howell messaged up to General Burgoyne that he was coming up to help him. That's why he waited 2.5 weeks between the first and second battles. Unfortunately, he came up and he got caught near West Point, Fort Montgomery, and Fort Clinton. There was a big battle there. Got beat and headed back to New York City. Burgoyne didn't know that. I just know you're coming up. He didn't know he met resistance and didn't make it. So finally his men started starving, and then it was like, I gotta go. We gotta head south. We gotta find food for these people, because it wasn't just, remember, the soldiers. Very common in the Revolutionary War for the soldiers' families to travel with them. Wasn't so common for the officers, which I would have thought it would be the other way around. But a lot of the officers in the British Army's families came with them. So that's all these extra mouths to feed, extra people to transport, extra baggage. So, tough world back then. Plus you're running into places where, on a map, this looks great. I could go water from Lake Champlain to Lake George. Yeah, that's nice in the winter. This is July. It's dried up. Now we got all these boats. Well, you can't just leave them, because all you got to carry them. And then, remember Philip Schuyler? You've heard of Schuylerville, New York. Philip Schuyler was the actual first commander of the Northern Army before he was relieved. He told his wife, when we're coming down there, go out and burn all the crops. Have the men go and cut all the trees down, because they knew they'd be coming this way. And when the trees went in the ground, they went in. They were big trees. They weren't these little puny things. These were called canopy trees. They were 4 and 5 foot trunks. So when they fell, the spike went into the ground. Hey, no chainsaws. Everything had to be done by hand, and these were done every 50 yards. Here's a big tree. Now we cut all the branches off. We drag it out. Now we got all these spikes sticking up. How are we going to run the horses across that? They'll cut them feet, So they had to pull them out. 50 yards, there's another one. By the time you get to the battle, you're so worn out, there's no energy. Complain, oh no, my internet's out, I'm going to die. Today's world. How would you survive then? That's why, you didn't live very long back then either. But you were constantly doing something. You were, those times, I'd love to live back then. It was so peaceful, such a simpler time. Yeah, it was simple time. There was no free time. It was constant work from the time the sun came up and even before, just to survive. And to go into battle with all these things. And they had a great communication system. And the uniforms were immaculate. The British had beautiful uniforms. They could cast these cannons that were, beautiful, beautiful workmanship back then. Paul Revere, what's he? He was a tinsmith. Revere wear. So anyway, there.
Quick point, one more.
No, that's it. You got your quota.
Back to Cherry Valley.
Yes.
So were there survivors?
There were.
And so we have firsthand primary information as to exactly what happened.
If you ever go up there, and I encourage it, it's $5, I think maybe $8. It don't cost a lot. In the museum here, there's actually a letter written from Joseph Brant to Percifer Carr. Remember I mentioned the Carr from. That's an actual letter. That's not a reproduction. That's the actual letter. But in there, you'll see in this one room, it's called, you go in, it's great. You walk in the door, and there's stuff you can buy and books and all. Over here is a room. It says Massacre Room. Here. So you go into the Massacre Room, and then you got in the middle. Anybody ever been to Gettysburg?
Yeah.
Probably in the 70s. Remember the electric map?
Yes.
You push a button, and it would say little round top. Where's little? Oh, and the little red light would pop. Or where's Devil's Den? Boop, and there it is. Well, they have one of those with the Cherry Valley, the whole town. So you push. Where's the Dunlop house that I talked about? Because this landscape doesn't look the same. There's no Moravitos on the map. Push the button. Oh, Dunlop house is out here. Wells house is here. Cemetery's here. Where they hid the clock. Hid the clock? What are you talking about? There's an actual grandfather clock in there. Now, they didn't hide the whole clock. They hid the works, the face. Somebody took off from the house and they actually took the clock with them when they knew the massacre was beginning on November 11th, and they put it in a trunk of a tree, like a log that was hollowed out, and they left it there till afterwards. And they came back and got it, and I don't know, it stayed in the family for 5, 6, 8 generations, and it's in that museum. Now, I love that you asked that, because I love to tell this story. It has nothing to do with the American Revolution. It has to do with the Cherry Valley, though, okay? You still got time?
We heard thunder.
Huh?
Talk faster.
Yeah, no, we got time, but it just started thundering.
Okay, real quick. You know the guy that invented the telegraph? Yeah, that's Samuel S.B. North. You know what he did in Cherry Valley? Well, he developed that there. The bookstore, Cherry Valley Bookstore. He developed it there. Well, he liked doing electronic stuff. He liked doing the electric map, like I talked about. Back then in the 70s, that was the modern technology, a red light popping up. Well, the guy lived across the street from him. This is the early 1800s. There was a book written by Mary Shelley. You know who wrote that? You know who that is? Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. Across the street lived the Undertaker. And he had a ready supply of bodies. So Morse thought, what wonder? After reading Shelley's Frankenstein, so he decided he was going to try and reanimate bodies in the basement of the Undertaker's house. And they had accounts of letters written. There were people going by the house at night, seeing these blue lights going across the room and hearing these trickling, crackling noises. Never worked. But it's pretty interesting, yes. So there's a marker there for Samuel F. B. Morse. So. All right, I don't want anybody getting electrocuted here, especially me. So thank you so much.
Scott, we want to thank you very much for this presentation, your wealth of knowledge. It's just incredible. And I know you do a lot of other programs, not only American Revolution, but possibly Civil War as well.
Did I speak too fast? A lot of stuff. I got.
So you got a lot of stuff, and you're very
From here on out, you can call me Lega Tutai. I don't do any Civil War stuff anymore. I'll be honest, no more Civil War. I don't.
Okay.
Got that thing off yet?
No.
Civil War is too controversial.
Oh,
Too
really?
controversial with the Confederate flag.
Oh, right.
So even if you make a mention, I'm a Civil War reenactor. I was a Confederate chaplain. I helped both. It's immediately. Oh,
Right.
so my wife says,
No more.
do something that was around here anyways, and I'm like,
It's
oh.
perfect. It's
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, that's off. She said to me, I was resistant at first. I said, I'm not that interested in the Revolutionary War. I don't know where she drugged me to, but I got there. I'm like, holy mackerel, this is and I just loved it. So we going to every site in New York State
I mean,
practically.
you got a wealth of
Oh
knowledge.
my goodness, it is just, and it's right here. I'm gonna be stupid not to do it.
I've never heard anybody. Oh my God.
I've given tours at Elmira, the old prison camp down there though, the Civil War prison camp. I don't know if you know where that is there. Right
In Elmira?
Yeah, right along. But around here, there's not a whole lot else. That and down in PA is Shahola train wreck. I've given tours down there too. But as far as Revolutionary War, oh man, it's right here. I'd be foolish not to.
No.
And I just love it. It's the beginning of our country, you know.
No, we could tell.
And
You
I've
got
always.
passion.
Oh, if anybody wants these, I'll leave them with you. Oh, I'm still recording here. I got this all on tape. Bye bye.